Hey, welcome to the Rev Up, the podcast where we talk about all things revenue growth. Today on the show, we have the one and only Jim Gianoglio. Jim is the Director of Marketing Analytics at Bounteous, a global digital experience consultancy. In his current role, he helps clients quantify the impact of the marketing efforts using marketing mix modeling. We talk about that quite a bit in today's show. Randomized controlled trials and other attribution-related methodologies. He publishes a weekly newsletter over at MMM Hub that focuses on marketing mix modeling and related topics. He's also the host of the Measure Up podcast. We got some synergy there, the Rev Up and the Measure Up, where he talks to marketers, analysts, and founders about all things marketing measurement. The Rev Up, this show, is brought to you by Trust the Process. Trust the Process is where all SMEs should come to get help with finding offshore staff members, particularly in the Philippines, for anything in sales, marketing, operations, customer service, and also HubSpot admin. But also, if you want help in implementing or improving your use of HubSpot or ActiveCampaign. On the show today, Jim and I cover a whole host of topics. We spend most of our time talking about marketing analytics and marketing measurement. This was an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed having Jim on the show. He knows his stuff to the absolute depths, and he's really good at what he does. So I hope you all enjoy. Welcome to the show, Jim Gianoglio.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate the opportunity to get on here and talk to your audience and geek out about all things attribution and marketing.
Oh, that sounds good to me. We met through a mutual friend, actually, John McGowan, who I believe you're on the measurement Slack with. Shout out to John McGowan.
Yeah, I love John. I've never met him in person, but we've been on various Zoom calls and that Measure Chat Slack group. So, yeah, funny dude. Very old friend of mine. Okay, so I was really keen to have you on this show because obviously your area of expertise is marketing measurement, marketing analytics, and measurement of marketing activities and channels. And I think this is, it's a particularly big challenge for a lot of businesses. And getting harder.
Nowadays. Yeah. You actually started out, though, as a photojournalist and ended up in marketing analytics. How the heck does that happen? Talk us through it.
Yeah, I mean, do you want the long or the short version? I'll try to keep it somewhat.
Let's go the half a glass of wine version.
Lovely. Yes. Yeah. So I went to school for commercial art and photojournalism, which was, a great degree to not help me with marketing analytics. But, I worked in newspapers for the first decade, after undergrad, as a photojournalist, taking pictures, writing stories. And then, through a series of unfortunate events, I was working for a small sort of a regional magazine, it was actually a dream job for about 6 months. The magazine was called Glucose Magazine. Terrible name because you think it's like for diabetics, but it was actually outdoor and adventure sports was the theme of the magazine. And so for 6 months, I got to mountain bike, camp, kayak, rock climb, you name it. Like if it was outdoors, I was out there doing it, photographing it, writing stories about it. And then the magazine lost its funding. So I was out of a job. I found out the day I got back from my honeymoon that the magazine had folded. So
wow,
that was kind of the turning point that I realized, maybe this photojournalism thing isn't all it's cut out to be, because it is a very low paying job. It is, you have to be in it for the passion of it and like telling the stories. But from there, kind of went through a series of circuitous events and ended up getting hired at another newspaper, but basically doing like grunt work. Like I would type in the obituaries and type in like house sale, like the the stuff that the newspapers just have to kind of put in there as filler. And then through word of mouth, I found out that the newspaper was trying to build a marketing department to sort of supplement its classified ads. They wanted to do TV commercials and radio commercials and PR and website building and everything, which was kind of crazy. And I don't really think it ever took off, but I found out about it. And for one reason or another, they actually said, yeah, you're the person we want to direct this. So I got into that, and, I was creating TV commercials, writing the scripts, doing the audio voiceovers.
Wow.
We bought a camera, and we would go out to like local businesses and like film, like remember this one, it was a carpet store. And so we kind of filmed the carpets like going past, and like, it was great fun, learned a ton. But that's kind of where I got into the digital side, because one of the things that we claimed to do, which was like, if we sold a job for it, it would be like me quickly finding out how to do it, was digital marketing. So we did SEO and paid search and all of that fun stuff too. As a newspaper, doing that kind of stuff was a little bit comical, but that kind of got me into SEO, and I kind of started reading into it a little bit. And my wife and I had a side business as photographers, so I had our own website, and I was always kind of tinkering around with like SEO, and I'd just been finding out about this. This is like back in 2005. Sorry, I think I'm already past a half glass of wine. I'll keep going though.
So I'll drink this one slowly.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is around 2005, and I was kind of tinkering around with, building websites and learning this thing called SEO. And then kind of started going deep on that, and subscribed to all the blogs, and started reading as much content as I could and really getting into that. And eventually had an opportunity to go to a company called Lunametrics. This was back in 2008, doing SEO. So that was kind of my first, first professional, like now I'm an SEO, I'm a digital marketer. So I did that for a few years at Lunametrics, left to go to another agency, also doing SEO for larger clients. So I had an opportunity at this agency called Impact, which was also in Pittsburgh, and they were eventually acquired by Merkle. But they had, they were a little bit farther along than Lunametrics at the time, and they had larger kind of Fortune 100, Fortune 500 clients. So I got to work with insurance agents and CPG brands doing SEO. And then around the time of all of the updates to Google, like Penguin and Panda and all of the other black and white animal updates, I just kind of got burnt out a little bit, and things were kind of changing. It was all about like content and link building, and those were never my forte. I was always more on the technical side, making sure that your site was structured in a certain way and all of that. And so I had an opportunity to actually go back to Lunametrics, but shifting from SEO into analytics. So that's where that's where I've been ever since, really. I've kind of went all in on analytics, a lot more straightforward, a little bit less like guesswork, or we think that Google's algorithm works this way. It's, digital analytics is a lot easier. You put the code on the site, you track the things that you need to track, and the data is right there looking at you. It's a little bit more straightforward. So yeah, that's where I've been ever since. Lunametrics was acquired back in end of 2017, early 2018 by a company out of Chicago called HS2 Solutions. We've since had several other acquisitions and kind of rebranded all of the kind of companies that came together as Bounteous. And right as that was happening, I was getting a master's degree of Masters of Science in Information Technology from Carnegie Mellon University, kind of focusing on data science, business intelligence and data analytics. And kind of ended that degree right as the acquisitions were happening. Yeah. So I was kind of fortunate, because I was planning on basically leaving, Lunametrics, because we didn't really have a data science team, but then the acquisition came, and lo and behold, we had a data science team. So I was able to just kind of stay put and keep chumming along. And and that was, that's been 5 years since that happened. And since then I've been still just working here at Bounteous, shifted roles back and forth a little bit, but more or less always focusing on marketing analytics, marketing science, and currently really just trying to help clients understand how to measure their marketing, how to make better decisions based on the data that's coming out of their marketing. So we're focused on things like marketing mix modeling, randomized controlled trials, various forms of attribution. So.
Nice. And Who are you guys doing that for? Like, who is your kind of core customer?
So we have several business unit kind of verticals. So everything from consumer goods to restaurants and quick serve restaurants to financial to health to industry. So we kind of have most of the big pillars of different industries. Clients like Coca-Cola, Nestle. Trying to think of the big names that everyone would be familiar with. Wawa.
Well, I asked this question in part because a lot of our audience are smaller businesses too. And so I always try and create a little bit of context for them, because sometimes some of the concepts that we talk about, you do have to deliver them sometimes slightly differently for small businesses than you do for bigger ones, in terms of like what you can afford to do. But you said a couple of things in there that I think are really interesting. I actually I love that you went from a very, I would say, like, creative start to your career and moved in. Well, not to say that data science is not creative in a lot of ways, but you went from the very sort of creative side of the world of marketing, advertising, etc., to the very logical side, which I think is an interesting transition. Was that just that you found stuff that you liked and you were really good at, and so kind of landed there? It organically happened, or should you have just been there all the time, or like how does that kind of happen? When do you make that realization where you go, oh, I don't want to do all these creative things anymore. I don't want to make ads, and I don't want to do video, and I want to work in the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, so I was just talking with someone the other day about this, the fact that and I didn't realize this until I was talking with them, that most people are either analytical or creative, not both. I mean, some people are both, and I guess that's, I would count myself there. I like both sides. I like the creative aspects of things. I like the data sides of things, the logic and analytic sides of things. And I've always kind of gone back and forth, so it's always been sort of natural for me. Even back when I was an undergrad, I went from commercial art major. I switched degrees to computer science, and then I switched back to commercial art. And it's like I've always enjoyed both. Usually when I'm kind of doing more of one thing, I always have some a little side project that fulfills the other need. So, right now I'm in the data science side, so I have some things that I work on the side that kind of feed my creative appetite.
I have to ask a question, because I have cats also. What is your cat doing in the background?
Oh no,
he's trying to climb out the window.
Yeah, I was wondering if they were going to make an appearance. So yeah, that's Juniper, and he likes to climb. So.
Oh, nice. We've got a couple of cats, and actually they often make an appearance in the background here. That was fantastic. I could just see him scraping at the corner of the window, trying to get it out. It's fantastic. Yeah. Okay, and the other thing you said that I thought was really interesting, which will resonate with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of the smaller and medium-sized business owners, is you went through a period of time where you were kind of the business was selling SEO or selling something, and then you were figuring out how to do it. I think that resonates with a lot of business owners, to be honest. Nice. And what is? I tell you what, I really want to know. What is firing you up in the world of marketing analytics at the moment? Because there's obviously a lot of stuff going on. The obligatory mention of AI, et cetera, et cetera. Tell me what's going on in your world. What's firing you up about the world of marketing analytics at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to not say like ChatGPT or AI because I've kind of held off of diving into that. I'm afraid that if I go into that, I'm just going to suck me in. So I haven't gotten too deep in there yet. But the thing that I've been just banging on for the past few years, really has been trying to get marketers to have a better understanding of how to measure what they're doing. So getting away from just multi-touch attribution and thinking about things like marketing mix modeling, and randomized controlled trials to really get a better understanding of what's driving your conversions, your sales, your orders, whatever it might be, and trying to get just a better understanding of these methods that MMM has been around for decades. It's definitely kind of making surging a little bit more in popularity lately as things like regulatory pressures like GDPR and CCPA, and Apple throwing the wrench into the system with ITP and ATT and lots of these acronyms that basically just mean that our data is going away. So we had to find out better ways to, or other ways to measure what's working and what's not. So I kind of went all in on that a few years ago, and have just been enjoying it and having a great time with it.
So talk to me about marketing mix modeling, because I know I spoke with John a little bit about that as well. We obviously have a lot of business founders and owners that listen to this podcast. When I say a lot, by the way, I'm not talking like a lot. I'm talking a lot for me. So give us the how should they be thinking about it? Well, actually, maybe let's start from what is it? How should they be thinking about it? What's the kind of outcome that it helps us work towards? Yeah,
absolutely. So one way to think about it is to just take a really super simple example, right? And to think about how a human would see patterns in the data. So let's say you're a small business, and you're not advertising on 12 different channels and all over the place. Maybe you're just running Facebook ads, and that's fine. And so, you look at your daily revenue, or maybe you look at it weekly, but hopefully maybe daily. You have some daily revenue numbers in a dashboard somewhere. And then you have in Facebook, you can see how much you're spending every day. And imagine you put together a chart, right, that shows it's just a line graph. And in a blue line, you see your daily revenue, and maybe it's kind of spiking up and down, and maybe it's higher during the week, and then maybe it dips down a little bit on the weekends. Maybe there's some seasonal patterns there. But you kind of see the patterns of the revenue data kind of up and down, and then that's in the blue line on the chart. And then overlaid on that in a red line, you see your Facebook marketing spend daily as well, right? And as humans, we're fantastic at seeing patterns in data, especially when it's visual like this. In fact, we're too good at it. Oftentimes, we see patterns where there's actually no causal nature, no correlation, right? There's a whole wonderful site called Spurious Correlations where you can see, a lot of funny things. We'll have to save that for another time, but just Google Spurious Correlations. There's a lot of great graphs of like the number of Nicolas Cage movies released in the summer is correlated with increased deaths by drowning, I think, is it? Or something like that. It's crazy. Anyway, humans are great at seeing patterns in data. So imagine you see this red line and this blue line, and you see, on this day that I doubled my marketing spend. Maybe I spent $1,000 a day. This certain day, I really pushed it a little bit harder, and I spent $2,000. Oh, and look, on that day where I doubled my spend, my revenue increased by 48%. Wow! And over here, when my ads got taken down for I used the wrong words and they got banned or whatever, and my ads were down for 3 days, I noticed that my revenue dipped down by like 28%. Right? We see these patterns in the data. So at a very simple example, very simple level, that's what marketing mix modeling is doing. It's just looking at the relationships between your marketing spend in various channels over time and your revenue over time. And it's seeing the patterns in data. When this marketing spend goes up, your revenue goes up by this much. When it goes down by this much. And it's kind of keeping track of those patterns over time. Now, it is a lot more complicated than that. There's a lot more nuance to it, but that's kind of a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Obviously, as you throw in it.
Is the point there to just, this is not my area of expertise, so I apologize if I don't ask particularly good questions about it. But here's, is the point here really that because we're looking at a revenue number, and we might have a number of things that we're doing, maybe we have one, but maybe we have 3 or 4 things, is the point that the revenue number is the ultimate goal, it is the ultimate objective to see that going up. And so some of our marketing channels don't necessarily directly transact. And so we're not always going to be able to see Facebook, particularly things around content. But Facebook ads might not be driving a huge direct ROAS, return on advertising spend. But when you turn Facebook ads off, it has a flow-on impact to your other channels. And so maybe it's not directly driving it, but it's driving something else in the background. Is that the reason why you kind of compare it all back to a revenue number?
Yeah, those are great points. And so the simple example that I laid out, I was like, oh, we spent more on this day and our revenue went up on this day. There's a lot more to sort of a more fully blown marketing mix model where you can throw in things like a term called ad stock, which is kind of what you alluded to, where like maybe Facebook isn't leading directly. It's not the last click before the purchase, right? It's influencing someone's decision that might happen a week from now. So you can use ad stock transformations on the data to kind of build in that reality. You're basically trying to statistically model reality. And so ad stock basically is a way to say, when we run ads on, let's say YouTube, YouTube ads or TV ads, the effect of those ads still kind of lingers over time. And so you might run an ad today and it's still sort of 60% effective the next day. And then from, 60% down the next day. And so it kind of, tails off like that. So you can use things like ad stock to kind of model that behavior. So it's not just on this day, marketing spend went up and revenue went up. It's not like it doesn't have to be like that. Now, the criticism is still valid around marketing mix modeling, even with modeling for things like ad stock. It can still have a tendency to possibly overweight sort of lower funnel activities, right? You can think of brands that have spent millions over the years with brand awareness campaigns, TV commercials, Super Bowl ads, where they're just they're giving good feelings to the people who see them, and maybe it over time it kind of builds this brand that then you kind of are able to more easily capture demand when it's there. And that sort of long lasting sort of brand building doesn't always get captured perfectly in a marketing mix model. But it's the best we have. and it does a better job, I would say, than some other methods.
So what's the goal really? Like, what's good in terms of accuracy? I mean, is that even possible to think of it that way? Like, are we trying to get to a place where we feel like it's 75% the truth, it's 80% the truth? Like, where are we trying to get to with how we analyze the marketing data?
Yeah, so I would say we're always trying to reduce uncertainty. There's always going to be uncertainty. We're never going to get 100% accuracy, 100% truth, right? The trick is, again, to reduce the uncertainty, and realize that comes at a cost, right? It might be through, either hiring an agency or internally building out marketing mix modeling, or there's a cost associated with that. It might be through running randomized controlled experiments to see what's the incremental lift in a certain channel, right? That comes with cost as well. And one thing that I've really been pushing for with marketers and digital marketers especially is trying to break them of this notion that there's a silver bullet. There's that one single tool that, I just use this and it tells me the answers. I think we've been sort of lulled into that over the past decade as tools and ad tech vendors come out, and Google Analytics has data-driven attribution, and AdWords uses its thing, and it just tells us it has a column for ROAS. That's what it is, right? And we kind of have been sort of led to believe that because we're tracking all of this data and we have all this data being collected from our users that we've never had before, and this is a decade ago when all of a sudden we can track our users, right? We kind of, along with that, I feel like marketers thought that because we had all of this tracking, that these tools and these vendors were saying, we have this data-driven thing, and maybe there's machine learning in the background, and so that just use that answer. And the problem is, to your point, like what's right, what's a good accuracy? What should we be going for? No, for the first point, everyone always thought it was like exact, it was precise, because we were collecting all this data. But I would say like it's never been perfect, right? Even before GDPR and before Apple started making all of their changes, there were still huge gaps in our data. Just, especially once you think, around, the early 2010s, as the iPhone came out, smartphones came out, all of a sudden you have the likelihood that people are getting to your site and viewing your marketing on different devices. Like that breaks multi-touch attribution, right? You can't connect the dots to a single user if they're using their phone and then their laptop and their work computer. Like that's broken, right? And they're watching your ads on their CTV, like on their TV, like this idea, like, even before GDPR, like that was a little bit crazy. Like I forget what the statistics were around like the average number of devices a user uses, but it was like more than 3 or more than 2 for sure. So like this whole idea that, multi-touch attribution, data-driven attribution, we have all the data, like that's always been fallacy. And it's just been since GDPR and more specifically with Apple that, that we've started to realize that the emperor has no clothes. And so now we're starting to realize, okay, well, if this multi-touch attribution thing that I always thought was like perfect and real and truth, it really isn't. What do I use? And what we recommend is triangulating through multiple methods. So, and realizing too that this isn't necessarily, possible for every company, organization. If you're sort of a small business, you may not have the resources to be doing multi-touch attribution and marketing mix modeling and randomized controlled trials and all of these things we're talking about. But I would say, start to realize that one thing that you used to use that told you what your ROAS was probably isn't right and definitely isn't right. It might be close to a good answer, but if you can, try to corroborate that with something else. Use surveys, right? That's another method you can use to try to corroborate.
Well, let's talk about that in a second, because I think this point you mentioned there being data driven. I mean, I reckon it was probably 10 years ago I started hearing particularly big companies saying we're data driven, we're data driven, we're data driven, and the truth is in marketing they weren't and they still aren't, right? Because just because you have the data doesn't mean that your decisions are driven by the data. And I think one of the things you were maybe alluding to there that we see all the time, because we help businesses implement HubSpot, an active campaign, and help them organize or at least organize their data so they can see exactly what's happening with their leads, where they're generating from, all those things. And what we see and what I've seen the last bunch of years is that what it's forced businesses to do, this data-driven approach, is that they're just investing in the things that they can measure, not the things that work.
Yeah,
and so they'd rather drive all of their spend into a 1% converting ad campaign because they can see exactly what's going on and they have the data around it, even if that, let's be honest, is inaccurate. But because they can see it, that makes them data-driven rather than what's actually working. Where are your customers actually coming from? Oh, we can't measure it? Well, let's not do it then. Right?
Exactly. It's like the drunk guy trying to find his keys, and he's looking right beneath the lamppost because that's where the light is. It doesn't matter that his keys are like underneath the car in the dark, right? But there's no light over there, so he can't look there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although I suppose a drunk person shouldn't be looking for their keys. They should just call an Uber.
The most important point. You mentioned something there about a little bit earlier about so Facebook locks you out of your leads, or AdWords or whoever. You've done something wrong and you get locked out. I'd love to get your take on this, because I've had this conversation with a few people. How often is the accidental test the one that leads to the best insight?
That's a great question.
Facebook locks you out. It's off. You didn't intend to do it, and then something pops up, and you go, "Oh, that's interesting." I'll give you an example while you ponder the question for a moment. Years ago, I was working for a company that recruited international students from like 160 countries around the world. I had a team in a bunch of different countries speaking 14 different languages to recruit students into universities, right? In Australia, the US, Canada, UK, all over. And we were recruiting a lot of students out of Arabic-speaking countries, right? We had a few team members essentially go out sick or be away for about 3 weeks, where we had no Arabic speakers for about 3 weeks. And with the students that came through at that time for their master's degrees, we saw the conversion rates massively spike. Massively spike. We were like, what the heck has happened here? And it turned out that students coming from Arabic-speaking countries that want to do masters have typically already done university overseas, and for some reason, a person with a British accent speaking English converted significantly higher, and we continued on down that path. And it was just a total accident. We did not need Arabic speakers for the master students.
That is
total
so
accident
funny.
totally changed things, but it was an accidental test. Right? Forced into it. Wasn't something we'd planned to test, but there you go. Have you seen those sorts of things happen before?
Yeah, and I would just say there's something about a British accent that maybe it's cultural differences, but like, if I hear someone talking in a British accent, I automatically assume they know what they're talking about and they're authoritative in my mind because they have the accent. It's just, I listen to a lot of podcasts and some of them with people over in the UK, and it's just like, sometimes I catch myself thinking, oh, this person is so smart. And then I think, wait a minute, why do I think that? Is it because they're speaking
it's like a colonial holdover or something?
I know,
like that.
right?
It's still got the power.
Yeah, but yeah, to your question though, like how often do these sort of accidental experiments happen or even provide the most insights? I would say in my experience, they happen a lot, but they go unnoticed. Or the team just doesn't have enough bandwidth to give it any thought. They just, the ads got canceled. They were off for a week and, oh no, we got to hurry up and turn them back on. And no one thinks to say, hey, wait, this is interesting. Let's see what happened here when they were off. And let's look at how that impacted our sales during that time. I think, it depends on how much resources you have and how much time you have your people if you have someone dedicated to just analyzing the data, they might be able to look at that. But otherwise it's, just churning through the job of the day and like getting things up and working. And it can be a little bit harder sometimes, especially depending on the scale of the accident, right? Like it might be a smaller accident where maybe just one campaign was paused for a few days, and maybe, to really see if there was actually any impact or what that impact was, you might actually have to run sort of a causal impact analysis and use some fun advanced statistics to really kind of get at that, that underlying change that may have been happened. But, yeah, I guess, something that people should be more aware of. And at least at the bare minimum, you see something like an accident like that happen, like at least look at it, just look in the data and see, does it look like it had a change or an impact? And if so, maybe kind of play around with it and think about it.
Yeah. Like just if there happens to be a change, whether accident or not, it's worth looking at, right? Looking at the impact. So when you get your hands on a new business, right? A client or whoever it happens to be, what's the sort of process that you follow to kind of go from like discovery and figure out what they're doing, what they need to change, and what we're kind of looking for? What's the steps you go through that somebody could maybe go at least partially through for themselves if they wanted to do it for themselves? What's the approach?
Yeah. So, the work that I'm doing, it's typically around attribution, usually involves marketing mix modeling or some form of that, maybe some test and learn programs. And so the first thing that we always look at is the data, the situation with the data. And more times than not, that's a blocker. Because companies, even super large companies that you would think, oh, I'm sure they have like super advanced systems and all of their data in this data warehouse, and it's all structured, and they have data dictionaries that tells everything what's in there and defines it. And, they have super advanced pipelines and ETL systems and data engineers working. No, they don't. They don't. Some of them, I mean, I'm sure some of them do. I'm sure there's some great companies out there that, have all of that, but a lot of times we get called in because they don't have that. So, a lot of times we have companies and they want to do some advanced analysis and marketing analysis and marketing mix modeling. And we come in and we say, well, can you show us your data warehouse, your marketing data warehouse? And they say, well, we have a little bit of, our Facebook data over here, and we have some analytics data over there, and our CRM system data that's over here. And it's just completely disorganized. And, so the first step is always getting the data side in order. You can't do any of this advanced analysis without good, clean, well thought through structured data. So, and data that is getting updated frequently, right? So it's not just like, oh, here's our data from last year. It's all in this one place. Unless it's getting updated frequently, it's not going to be worth much, 6 months from now or a year from now. So a lot of the work that we end up doing starts with that, right? Because we have to have the data in good order and getting it, updated frequently to really provide the value afterwards with the analysis and the modeling.
Yeah. What typically causes the problems? What are the mistakes people make in their data? I mean, aside from just not capturing it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess not capturing it usually isn't the case, right? Because, people usually have Google Analytics on their website or some analytics on their website. And if they're running Google ads or Facebook ads, that data is there, right? It's being captured. I would say it's not necessarily a mistake that people are making. I would say it's something that people are realizing is valuable, and that there's a reason to start organizing their data together in this way. It hasn't always been the case, and there hasn't been, always been the idea that like, oh, I have my analytics data over here, I have my HubSpot data over here, I have my Facebook data here, my ads data here. Why I should put that all together in one place? And like, maybe large organizations, that's been something that they've done. But certainly like smaller organizations, you have resource constraints and you can't do everything, and it's fine to have data in its own place. And it's funny because so Google put out an open source package and this sort of methodology that they called regression-based attribution, or RBA, which is basically just marketing mix modeling, but only for your digital channels. And in this sort of this paper that they kind of put out along with it, they talk about, oh, this is great because all of the, we're just looking at digital data. So all the data is easy to get and it's easy to work with, and you can update it quickly. It's like, yeah, in a perfect world, if, you have, an ETL tool, maybe you're using Fivetran or something like that to like pull all of your data together, and you're using maybe, BigQuery or Azure or some, cloud data warehouse to store it all, or Snowflake, right? But this is all new to a lot of people, right? Not a lot of businesses are sort of at the high end of the maturity scale in this respect. So, I mean, it's moving that way, sure. And some companies are already there, but there's still a lot of laggards that are kind of playing makeup here, trying to get their data in order.
Is there anything you, like, let's say, for example, you're a small to mid-sized business and you're just wanting to make sure that you kind of start from the right basis. Are there any tools or how would you suggest they go about that?
Right. And just so we're clear, like when you say small to mid, are we talking like 10 million revenue to 100 million or 1 to 10 million? Like,
I would say 1 to 50 is usually the sorts of people I'm talking about. Obviously, there's a big difference between those businesses. The ones are really starting out, but maybe let's just talk in the 10 to 50 range.
Perfect. Yeah. So I would say, So this is going to sound a little bit probably controversial, but I would say use last click. Use last click attribution.
Yeah.
And I have to explain a little bit, right? Like people are probably screaming at their phones right now saying, "This idiot, we spent the past 10 years getting off of last click because it was a stupid way to look at things. And we're fancy now. We have multi-touch attribution, but like I talked about before, there's a ton of reasons why multi-touch attribution is just, um, failing, right? Especially now with the data kind of going away. The way that I've been thinking about it more now is, use last click, but when you're using last click, don't look at that final conversion, right? Because if you're looking at last click attribution to sales, of course, you're going to overvalue bottom of the funnel activity, right? But you need to take a step back and think, what is it that I'm trying to achieve with these different channels or these different tactics? And I'm going to use that as my framework. So the goal of my paid search campaign, that's performance. I want people to click on the ad and buy. So that's about bottom funnel. My goal for paid search is they click and they purchase. And so that's my goal for that. So sure, last click, I'm going to see, how many purchases I got from paid search based on a last click model. But when you talk about something like, let's say you're running some video ads on YouTube, and it's not about call to action, it's not about purchase now, it's more about like learning about the company and learning about the brand or your product, and it's more awareness.
Selling
right?
the problem.
Exactly. The goal of that isn't to get someone to click on it and make a purchase. The goal there is to get them aware of the problem, get them aware of your company, of your product, things like that. And so use last click towards those goals and objectives. And the thing you have to think through is, okay, what are the KPIs there? What are the metrics I'm looking at? So you might look at things like, you might look at impressions, right? How many people did you reach? That's certainly one of the metrics that you want to, if you're trying to reach a broader audience, you want to know how many impressions you got. But impressions can get a little bit not very valuable because, if you're paying, you could pay $20 CPM for impressions, or you could pay $100 CPM for impressions. And those impressions are going to be very different, right? It depends on how they're being targeted and what audience you're reaching and that sort of forth. So you can't just look at just the number of impressions, but you can qualify that. You can say, well, the goal of this ad isn't to get them necessarily to click on it, but certainly some people are going to click on it and follow through. So that could be a measure of the importance of the impressions, right? So if you're reaching the right audience and you're getting thousands of impressions and it's the right audience, some of them are going to click. So that's, you can use clicks or click-through rate as a sort of metric of, yes, you got a lot of impressions, but what was the quality of those impressions? And then you could even look at even one more step further in engagement with the site based on how many pages they viewed, or did they fill out the form, or did they, watch the video on your site, or, other various, whatever engagement is on your website that's important to you. You could see that, I guess, as another gauge of, how valuable those impressions were, right? But again, the point is you're not using last click to say, okay, someone watched this ad on YouTube and then they clicked it and they purchased. And so that's how I'm going to value that YouTube ad. You're saying, well, I'm going to value it based on primarily on impressions, but I'm also going to consider click-through rate and site engagement as another way to kind of gauge the value of those impressions. But the goal of that ad is brand awareness. It's getting a broader reach to more eyeballs. So that's what you want to measure it on. Yeah. And you can use last click for that. You don't have to worry about cookies being deleted and all of that. You just last click works.
Yep. I'm certainly seeing a lot of B2B businesses actually moving their advertising spend towards awareness campaigns. Lots of them getting good return on focusing their advertising spend on, selling the problem, on education, on creating audience and, bringing that audience into some owned controllable platforms, like much more focus on how they build awareness, sell the problem, build audience, all that sort of stuff, which is interesting. We personally, because of this challenge around attribution, changed the way that we measure for ourselves. And because of that, have changed the way we help companies set up their CRM system. And one of the biggest changes is, and I think this probably speaks to something I know is like a big belief of yours. You have to decide what the goal is. What are we actually trying to achieve, and then build your metrics off the back of it. And I think most businesses, unfortunately, fall into the trap of just measuring based on leads. And I think leads are a pretty terrible metric because they only really tell one story, and a very limited story. And they're also not very it's not a very good metric in terms of quality either. If you're going to measure a marketing team based on leads, what you find over time is that the lead quality declines in order to hit the lead number target.
Exactly. And then the sales team is complaining, they're giving us garbage leads.
Yeah, and then everyone's going, the sales team just needs to work harder.
Which
I've very rarely found to be the actual truth. But so we moved to a model where essentially we break the two things out. And this is by no means our idea, but break the two things out, and we say a portion of our marketing is about demand creation, and a portion of our marketing is about demand capture. Mm-hmm. And so essentially it's like, how did they hear about us? Why are they talking to us? Versus what is the path they took to get to us? Right? I'm really trying to separate those two things out so that we can focus with some better metrics and KPIs around which one. And then in the sales pipeline and in the capture, moving towards self-reported attribution. So the customer tells us how they heard about us. And that might be from a business networking event. It might be from a podcast. And the biggest outcome of this is that in the work that we do, which is B2B, which is technology, which is outsourcing, the truth is that the vast majority of our convertible and converting pipeline comes from referrals, from business networking, and from content marketing. It doesn't come from ads.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It gets to us from ads. It gets to us through our website. It gets to us through, honestly, even like organic social. It's not... They didn't find out about us through organic social in the most part. They heard about us somewhere else, looked us up on Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever, and then DM'd us, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes you just have to be strategic and say like, okay, I know my audience. I know this is where they hang out. I know this is how they consume content. So I'm going to make a bet. I'm going to do a podcast, even though it's not, hugely measurable in terms of how many leads it brought, right? Or I'm going to do this conference. I'm going to put a booth up at this conference. Like, you can measure how many badges you scanned and who you talked to at this conference. But, like with B2B and SaaS, and a lot of times with like account-based marketing where it's a long sales cycle, like, that gets lost in the noise. Like you're never going to be able to like sort of concretely prove out like, oh, we were at this conference and that caused this person at this company to recommend us to his CFO who ended up, doing the purchase order. And like there, with long sales cycles
that
and
third
B2B,
and
like,
fourth,
oh my gosh. Yeah.
That third and fourth generation, like give up on that. But like, and there's definitely some error in the self-reported attribution because let's be honest, some people don't remember where they heard about us. But the thing that we are finding that we can measure more because of it are things like the podcast, right? Mm-hmm. We talked earlier about, figure it out in order to sell it. Like we're literally doing that now. We've been doing this for ourselves for 7 or 8 months. We're already generating significant pipeline and return on doing these podcasts. But we can only track that because we ask the question once they enter the sales pipeline of, where'd you hear about us? And we're getting people saying the podcast,
nice.
Right?
And so many people
networking community, etc.
Yeah. And so many people like don't do surveys and they're missing, they have Google Analytics and then that has their, data-driven attribution. They completely miss out on that.
Yeah. And even surveys like, the thing that I'm finding, even with surveying customers, is actually the best insights still happen in customer interviews, right?
Yeah.
I think it's so funny where we've gone on this cycle of becoming so data driven and so digital, is that we are starting, because of things like GDPR and and Apple and Facebook and whoever else having to change the way they track data and what data they can give us. Because of that, a lot of companies are starting to realize that some of the best stuff they do is done in person, face to face, or in conversation, or not through a website, or not through Facebook, or not through any of these other digital channels. We're starting to see that think a bit more creatively about how we measure it, think a bit more creatively about how we deliver it. And lots of companies are seeing that, like, actually going to that conference and exhibiting and meeting all those people, actually it does have a big impact. And maybe that is better spend than spending it on SEO or something like that, especially when you were only spending on SEO because somebody came through organic search that actually saw your CEO speak at an event 6 months ago.
Right. Yeah. It's there's I was just listening to a podcast earlier today, and I'd have to think a little bit to remember exactly which one it was, because I'm a bit of a junkie with podcasts. I listen to a lot of them, but they were talking about the idea that, like, there's this return to human marketing, like being human, and not, like you said, not being so heads down and data driven. It's like, actually, like, engaging with people and talking to them, and and just having that kind of human element to it, and not being so robotic about it. So
I think if you're in marketing, anybody in marketing should be having conversations with customers, like actual human conversations. I think it totally changes the dynamic. And I think even if you're responsible for interpreting and analyzing data, you should probably talk to some customers, because understanding where they're coming from impacts how you view what you're seeing, right?
Absolutely.
Knowing what their interests and problems and what their world looks like, gives you a better understanding of how they might behave.
I can imagine some data analysts or data scientists, like, just cringing at that idea of, like, you mean I have to talk to a customer? Like, data people have this sort of stereotype of being introverted, probably somewhat rightly so. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily the data person. It could be the marketer. It could be someone on the team who's interviewing customers. Maybe
listen to
recording
some
the
sales
conversation.
calls.
Yeah, exactly.
Same thing.
Yep.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Hear what they're saying. Hear and what they're thinking, and why they say yes and why they say no. It just gives a better understanding for how we can manage their journey through marketing and into sales. Speaking of data scientists, this is going to be the most ham-fisted transition, but I'll give it a go. Speaking of data scientists, one of the challenges that I see for a lot of businesses is that scaling marketing teams is maybe more challenging than it's ever been, because a really very smart friend of mine always says marketing's so specialized now. It's impossible for any one person to be a 10 out of 10 in all things marketing, right? So what we see is that it's hard for some businesses to scale because they can't necessarily afford to have all of the individual skills required in order to get the job done, whether that's somebody managing ads, somebody writing copy, somebody building websites, somebody analyzing data, somebody email. Like, these are specialized skills. What do you think in your world of marketing analytics? Like, what are the core skills required in order for somebody to be able to do this well? Like, what are the parts of the team that you need to get a good result?
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time of thinking of, like you said, all those specialties, like, because it used to be the case that you could have one person who did paid search, paid social, because it was just Google Ads and Facebook. And maybe they did email too, right? Like, it was a much simpler time just 10 years ago or 5 years ago. but now you have like all of the different channels and TikTok and Snapchat and Pinterest
And there's
and
platform
Twitter
specialists too, like individual
exactly.
technologies.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
HubSpot specialist. Maybe you need somebody that runs Kajabi because you're doing educational marketing. Like,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. And on the sort of marketing analytics side, you know, we don't have to have as deep channel specific knowledge necessarily. Although I would say the more knowledge you have of how different channels work, the better you would be as a marketing analyst. But really, it's more on the side of understanding the data, understanding kind of the general way that marketing works, and then having that statistical background to be able to go in and build some models or run some experiments to try to understand what's working or what's not. One thing that I would say, like, and I know I said we wouldn't dive into AI and ChatGPT, but so there
do
is.
it.
This is kind of new.
fears.
So there's a new edition last Friday. What's today? Today's Tuesday, right? I think it was Friday. So last Friday, ChatGPT sort of soft launched to their developer community, just like to select whitelisted developers who are part of the paid program or who paying the $20 a month, and they have the plugins to ChatGPT. Should I explain that, or do you think the audience kind of is familiar with that?
Yeah.
So everyone knows ChatGPT, probably.
Yeah.
Okay, so ChatGPT, you type in a question and the computer generates a very human-like response that's very smart. Sometimes it hallucinates, but usually it's fairly good. And then there's a paid version of ChatGPT where you actually can have plugins. So before it was just you type in a question or a prompt, and then it outputs puts out a response. But now, and I don't think this is generally available either. I think this is also still in sort of beta. They have plugins. So ChatGPT could interface with Kayak or with Expedia or with Airbnb or other services that basically create these plugins that allow ChatGPT to access their underlying data. And so now you could say to ChatGPT, hey, I'm going on vacation next week. Can you find, which airport, book a flight, and show me some hotels in the city and rank them by this order, and go ahead and book the one that's closest. And like it's actually starting to be able to like go out and do things, not just give you a response. So the newest thing now that I just found out, this was just talked about that I heard of last Friday, is I have to think of what they call it, the code interpreter. It's a code interpreter, which I think is a kind of a terrible name. But in essence, sort of the demo that I saw was you're now able to upload, let's say, a CSV file to ChatGPT. CSV file could be of your marketing data, your revenue data, whatever it might be. And then you basically ask GTP, hey, can you basically give me a little bit of information about this data? What's important here? What are the trends? And it basically does what we call exploratory data analysis, right? It is the data science that is kind of taking that first peek at the data and saying like, okay, here's what's in this CSV. Here are the different columns of data. Here's some important trends in the data. Here's the averages. Here's, the histogram of distribution of this or that's in the data. Like it's doing that. And like, there's still some caveats and some things to deep in the details that I would point out as saying like, okay, yeah, but it hasn't considered this or that hasn't. But very quickly, I could see a case where, like, to your point, sorry, this is kind of a long-winded answer. To your point, like, it's harder than ever to hire good marketers or good analysts. But I think in the not too near future, at the quick pace that this is advancing, we'll have tools like this that can sort of supplement a marketer's abilities to do some of these things that they used to have like a data scientist on staff to query the data warehouse and write a custom query and output a response. And like, that'll be all, just interfacing with ChatGPT.
Seems like it. Although I do remember, I remember uploading CSV files to IBM Watson, that free version they had. What was that six years ago, something like that.
Oh, wow.
And being able to, it would then tell you, okay, so here's maybe 4 or 5 things you can play around with measuring. It would just like organize your data for you and start. So like we've been on this path for a while, but I think like it's the ability to interact in a way where you can give directions, right? That's the really, I think that's going to be the super powerful part of this especially for the small and medium-sized businesses, right? Where they don't have the tech background. They can essentially just ask the technology to do the thing that they want to do. You know, all those things that they used to say to an IT department, well, surely it can just do this. And the IT department will be like, no, it can't do that. You know, they'll be able to give those commands. Like that is essentially the AI that HubSpot's adding, for example.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You'll be able to just essentially give HubSpot a command and say, you know, if I'm a salesperson, I've just spoken to somebody, hey, find Jim's contact, create a deal under this pipeline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, for this amount, close date this date. And rather than having to go in and do all of the clicks and move around and make things happen, you just give it the command and away it goes. And I think that some of that, even that front end work, I think is going to simplify a lot of work, not just the analysis work, but being able to give a command and say, how has our show me a report of how our revenue has fluctuated in comparison to our spend in Facebook, for example, is going to be really interesting. The reporting, the data it'll be able to push out, the dashboards you'll be able to build just from a command is going to be amazing.
I mean, we're literally weeks away from that. Like that's you know, some people who already have access to this, like that's already there, right? Like it's crazy, you know, how fast this has gone. It's funny. I remember, oh gosh, this was like back in 2013 or 14, maybe. We used to do a lot of April Fool's Day blog posts back in the day. Nice. And one we did, we went all out, we did video, and the whole idea was, because this was like maybe right when Siri had come out, or maybe like Amazon Echoes had come out, and everyone was like talking to devices. And so we like made this April Fool's Day joke that Google Analytics built in voice capabilities. And so we'd be like, now you can check your Google Analytics, but just by using your voice. And okay, Google Analytics, tell me what my revenue is. And like we kind of faked the whole screen of it and the audio, voice, and that, you know, we kind of faked that for the video. But like that's here, like that April Fool's post has basically come true.
Yeah. Yep. The voice control stuff I think is super interesting too. Like this text-based input is super helpful, but the people that, like, this is certainly a tangent, but the people that I've found voice commands the most helpful for are people that are less tech savvy. Like, apologies in advance to my dad, but my dad's not the greatest with tech, but he uses voice commands all the time because it's easy. He just asks Siri to do a thing that he wants to do that he wouldn't have been able to figure out how to do for himself. You know, a thing that used to take him a while. And my dad's got bad eyesight, and so, you know, those voice commands make a big difference. What is my dad going to be able to do in a year's time in you know, marketing analytics just by asking a system to do it for him? Like, that's going to be super interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, and the pace of change is so quick here. It's just exciting to see, you know, what's going to be next and how it's going to unfold. So,
and how we will control it, or it will control us, right? That's the big question.
Yes, that's why I always end my prompts for ChatGPT with "thank you" and "please," and you know, hopefully it'll look kindly on me when it overtakes the human race.
Awesome. I've got a couple of questions I would like to wrap up on. I always ask everybody that comes on this show, particularly about learning, because I think that, you know, this is a platform for teaching people how to do revenue growth. Obviously, marketing attribution and measurement is a big part of a modern revenue growth engine. But the people that we get on here, obviously, know what they're talking about, and they got that information from a bunch of places. Some of it from trial and error, some of it from their own learning. Is there a book, a podcast, a Slack channel? Like, what's been the biggest difference maker for you? What's one recommendation you would make in terms of a place people can go to learn about this sort of stuff?
Oh, geez, just one. I have like 12.
You can do 2 or 3. That's fine. I think John McGowan gave us about 5 or 6, to be honest. In the end.
Yeah, I mean, part of what I'm going to say is maybe ones that he mentioned. So the Measure Slack, the Measure Chat Slack, that is hands down the best resource, bar none. Like it's kind of the place where everyone is, and like the smartest people in the room are hanging out there, and the people who are like brand new to it and asking questions are there. And everyone's commingling, and like, so you can have the new person asking a question, and like the Simo Ahava or the Krista Seiden or the, throw out big name here, it's like responding to them. And so that's just super valuable. I would definitely recommend people, sign up for that. Other than that, like I mentioned, I'm a big podcast junkie. So I'm probably close to 100 different podcasts that I'm subscribed to. Some of them no longer publish, and some of them are sporadic, but I like to listen to a lot of podcasts. So there's Analytics Power Hour with Tim Wilson and Mo Kiss and Michael Helbling. Gosh, I was blanking on names. That's going to be embarrassing. Standard Deviation with Simo Ahava and Juliana Jackson. There's, of course, the Rev Up podcast that I have been listening to ever since I found it through the episode with John. And then, there's some newsletters I like to subscribe to. One I'll point out that's kind of specific toward marketing measurement is the Marketing Measurement Roundup by Recast. Recast is a tool for marketing mix modeling. Some incredibly wicked smart guys over there and gals that are kind of putting together a great tool for marketing mix modeling, and they do a great job with the newsletter every week.
Nice. And you also have your own podcast and newsletter. How do people get access to those two things?
Yeah. This is the thing that satisfies the creative side of my mind for right now, which is, the newsletter I started about a year ago, and it's mmmhub.org. MMM as in marketing mix modeling. And so that's a weekly newsletter, mostly focused on marketing mix modeling and other sort of measurement related topics. And then most recently is the podcast called Measure Up. And I have a couple of episodes out now and a couple more in the can that'll be released over the next couple of weeks. And that's sort of a more general marketing measurement. So not just marketing mix modeling, but just general marketing measurement topics.
Excellent. And what's the best place for people to reach out to you if they want to come and have a chat about maybe you helping them fix their marketing measurement?
Sure. Probably the best way would be LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Jim Gianoglio. It's Gianoglio. It's kind of a fun one to spell. But yeah, you could look.
They'll be able to see it in the title of the podcast.
Yeah, just copy and paste. I'm also on Twitter, so you can reach out to me there. First initial, last name, because I am that creative. And,
my Twitter handle is Benjamin Shipley, so I'm equally as creative.
Yeah, those are probably the two best places.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an awesome conversation. Lots of really interesting learnings. We'll have to have you back at some point. I really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on. It's been an honor.